He has launched the campaign to try and counter the extremists.
Now speaking out to denounce terror and extremism.
30,000 people formed a human chain in the south this afternoon in the name of peace.
We're asking if religious intolerance is on the rise.
We believe that religious freedom is a fundamental human right.
Giving a message that Islam is a religion of peace.
We must all endeavor to spread love and a sense of community.
In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, may the peace and blessings of Almighty God be upon you. Welcome to Press Point, the 21st edition. Today we're looking at the recent atrocities which have taken place in Paris regarding the killings of 17 people in total. This all stems from the recent attacks in the Charlie Hebdo magazine offices. We want to take a look today at some of the issues which are raised as a result of these attacks. This is twofold, starting initially with the atrocities and the loss of life, and looking at this from the perspective of Islam. Is this justified, and does Islam permit the killing of people in this context? The murder of people in this context, we might say. And then secondly, we also want to take a look and say, what about the freedom of speech? If people are offended by these magazines, what's the correct response? And is the right of freedom of speech, what are the limits, what are the boundaries, and how should we morally conduct ourselves when we're expressing ourselves? So the second element is freedom of speech. As ever, I'm joined by my faithful brother Farooq Mahmood in the studio. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Walaikum assalam, brother Jonathan. As you mentioned very clearly, we are talking about, of course, freedom of speech. Does it have any limits, or is it limitless? Can you talk about anything about anyone, anywhere in the world? Or do we think there is some responsibility attached to it? What do you think about this? Share with us your views. And what is that a Muslim should do as a response? Should they go out and start killing people the way these people have done recently? Or Muslims have some other role to play? You can share with us your views, sending us emails to presspoint@mt.tv, or you can send us your tweets, but please use the hashtag PressPointMTA. You share with us, and we'd love to share with the worldwide MTA audience. Brother.
We're also very blessed, Farooq Sahib, because we have two very special guests in the studio with us today. So on my immediate left, we have Khalil Yusuf Sahib. Khalil Sahib is a prominent figure in the international press desk, as well as holding legal roles within the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And he'll bring both of those elements to bear today, inshallah. So welcome on the show, Khalil.
Assalamualaikum.
And in addition, walaikum salam rahmatullah. In addition, we have Maulana Abdul Ghani Jahangir Khan. Jahangir Khan Sahib is in charge of the international press desk and is also a very French desk, pardon me, and is also, of course, a very prominent voice in relation to religious matters on MTA. So welcome, Jahangir Khan, to our show today. Jazakallah, Jazakallah. So as we mentioned, Farooq Sahib, we want to take a look at these recent attacks. So I think to start off, let's get a factual update and also take a look at how the world has responded. I know you've done a lot of research online, so what have you found, brother?
Yes, we have, of course, this story is now all around the world on every big news channel. This is what is being discussed almost 24/7. Charlie Hebdo was attacked, of course, a few days back on the 7th of January that was, and the killings took place in a huge number, of course, and France emerged from one of the worst security crises in decades after 3 days of attacks by gunmen. Of course, looking at those 3 days from 7th to 9th of January, these people killed about 12 people who were associated with Charlie Hebdo. They killed 3 police officers in France, as well as 4 Jews. Jews were also killed in a Jewish market. So it caused a massive mayhem as a result, and the fury and outcry by the media has been very, to an extent, justified, but at some levels also been questionable. France 24 has reported that ever since that time, Charlie Hebdo, which normally sells out 60,000 copies a week, is sold 5 million copies last time around. It's about 80-odd% increase, not percent, 80-odd times increase in its publication. Clearly, they have gained, at least financially, out of it, unfortunately, after losing so many people. But 80 means almost, maybe 2 years' worth of subscriptions have been sold in a few days. Then, at the same time, we have a story here. Not a story, but a combination of various reactions by world leaders. Of course, I can read maybe one or two very quickly. David Cameron, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, says, "I'm a Christian. I obviously do not like seeing the religious things I hold dear mocked in an unpleasant manner. But in a free country, if people want to attack my religion and my beliefs, you accept that because it's part of living in a free country. So of course he's telling about the hurt, but saying hurt could be acceptable if it's for a free society. And then just one more, head of a, although there's a lot of other comments, perhaps we'll upload on our Twitter account. There's one more from the head of a Parisian mosque called Hamad Hamani, who says, we don't want to throw oil on the fire. We consider these caricatures to be acceptable, he says, and they are not degrading for the Prophet. And one more comment from Pope Francis, who says freedom of speech has limits. A very sensible and very reasonable comment also was the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, also mentioned that with appreciation, that that was a very balanced and a very just approach. And the Pope said, if my good friend, Dr. Gaspari, who organizes Pope's trips, he speaks badly of his mother, he says, he can expect to get a punch, the Pope said, throwing a pretend punch at the doctor who was standing beside him, of course was jokingly, and he said, you cannot provoke, the Pope said, you cannot insult the faith of others, you cannot make fun of the faith of others, there is a limit.
Okay, very interesting. So if I can come to yourself, Khalil, first. So if we could get a sense of how the world has responded to this attack, because I think for a number of days there was almost nothing else in the media apart from this coverage. And I think still it's really capturing the mind, the global consciousness in response to this attack. So how has the world responded to this incident, would you say? If you were to try and summarize it, the tragedy of this incident, how has the world responded?
Well, when we define the world, we include Muslims and non-Muslims, people of religion, people of no religion and all of that. And it's fair to say that as far as the media has reported it, the vast majority of people have received this horrific and terrible set of murders as being something that they condemn, and condemn absolutely, as we do. World leaders have also come out and they have said that they stand by Charlie Hebdo, and have said that they come out in support of what they term as being freedom of speech and the right of Charlie Hebdo and others to offend. That is something that we'll probably come on later on into the show. But ultimately it's worth saying at this early stage that whatever the grievances that these individuals had in the Jewish supermarket or in Charlie Hebdo, there is no justification at law, in morality or in Islam for the indiscriminate murder of individuals. That is not the way to respond to a grievance. And the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, and indeed 1.6 billion Muslims across the world, I think it's safe to say, all absolutely condemn these violent and horrific murders.
And this is a connected incident. You talk about how people then respond to this incident, and I think it's quite important to get a sense of how has the world responded to the religion of Islam, and how has it affected their attitudes towards Islam. I think, Farooq, you found some interesting research on this. Is that right? What did you find online?
There are some charts, maps and infographics on The Economist journal recently. It was 7th of January when it was published. Some sort of eye-opening and telling statistics. They did some research in various countries in Europe, including Spain, and also Israel was also, some people in Israel also asked questions. And the question was, is Islam compatible with the way of life in West? And the response was perhaps not surprising. Most of the people thought in Spain, for example, 60% plus, that Islam is not compatible with the life in Europe and the West. In Israel, also about 60%, and Britain and US being the least in that group, having about 45 to 50% believing the Muslims are not compatible in the way of life with the West. And another question they asked was also very interesting. And they asked people questions, what do you think is a population of Muslims in their countries? And interestingly, the answer was pretty consistent throughout Europe. And in every case, people thought the number of Muslims were more than they really were. So for example, in Spain, people were asked a question, how many Muslims do you think reside in your country? And they said 16%, and the true answer is only 2%. In Britain, for example, similarly, people were asked a question, they said 21% are Muslims. In reality, it's only 5% Muslims who live here. So perhaps there's something which is making people think there are more Muslims in this country than there are, maybe because the news is always covering Muslims more than others. And then we have, of course, I think as a response, the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, I mean, he has said something which clearly sums it all up, that whatever these people are doing has got nothing to do with Islam. So very quickly picking up one of the press releases which was as a result of his previous Friday sermon, not the last one, we'll discuss about the last one a bit later on, but the one before the last, he said that the perpetrators of this brutal attack may seek to justify their acts in the name of Islam and its holy founder, peace be upon him, but their acts have no relation whatsoever to the true teachings of Islam. Nowhere does Islam permit taking the law into your own hands or to injure or murder anyone else. Now we're blessed to have Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad's words of wisdom about what's happened. Very balanced approach. You can listen for yourselves. There are a few sound bites, but would request you to go and listen to it, the whole Friday sermon, an hour long. So let's have a look at a few sound bites and see what Hazur said about the event.
गुज़श्ता दिनों फ्रांस में जो हालात हुए और मुसलमान कहलाने वालों ने एक अखबार के दफ्तर पर हमला करके जो 12 आदमियों को मार दिया, उसके बारे में मुख्तसर ज़िक्र करके गुज़श्ता जुमे में मैंने अहमदियों को, अफराद जमात को दरूद पढ़ने की तरफ तवज्जो दिलाई थी कि कत्ल व गारतगरी से इस्लाम की फ़तह नहीं हो, बल्कि आप सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम पर दरूद भेजने से हम अपने मकसद में कामयाब हो सकेंगे। नीज़ इस फ़िक्र का भी मैंने इजहार किया था कि इस हमले के बदले में गलत रद्द-ए-अमल दिखाया जा सकता है या दिखाया जाएगा, और यही इन लोगों से उम्मीद की जा सकती थी। गलत रद्द-ए-अमल दिखाकर इन लोगों ने भी दोबारा खाके शाया किए, जो फिर हमारे लिए तकलीफ़ का मज़ीद बायस बने, और हर हकीकी मुसलमान के लिए तकलीफ़ का बायस बनने चाहिए थे। इस दहशतगर्दी का क्या फ़ायदा हुआ? 2-3 साल पहले जो इन्होंने हरकत की थी, इन अखबार वालों ने, उस गलत हरकत को और जो दब गई थी, फिर मुसलमान कहलाने वालों के गलत अमल ने हवा दे दी। जो कुछ ये अखबार पहले करता रहा, उस पर मगरबी दुनिया के बहुत से लीडर्स ने इस पर सख्त रद्द-ए-अमल दिखाया, इसको सख्ती से रद्द किया, और कई हुकूमतों ने कहा कि हम कभी अपने अखबारों को इजाज़त नहीं देंगे। लेकिन गुज़श्ता हफ्ते के वाक़या के बाद बहुत से बज़ाहिर अक़ल रखने वाले और ज़िम्मेदार लोगों ने और लीडरों ने इस बेहुदा अखबार की हमायत का ऐलान कर दिया, और मुख्तलिफ़ जगहों से उन्हें कई मिलियंस डॉलर की इमदाद मिलनी शुरू हो गई। इस अखबार की इशाअत जो सिर्फ 60,000 थी, और कहा जा रहा था कि शायद ये अपनी मौत आप मरने वाला है, ख़त्म होने वाला है बिल्कुल, और ख़त्म हो जाएगा। मुसलमान कहलाने वालों के गलत अमल ने उसकी इशाअत को इस 5 मिलियन से ऊपर पहुंचा दिया। ये दुनियादार तो वो लोग हैं जिनकी दीन की आँख अंधी है, जो अल्लाह ताला के नबियों की बात तो एक तरफ, खुद खुदा ताला का इस्तिज़ा करने से भी बाज नहीं आते। इन जाहिलों के अमल पर अगर हमारी तरफ से भी जाहिलाना रद्द-ए-अमल हो तो ये ज़िद में आकर मज़ीद जहालत की बातें करेंगे। बस अल्लाह ताला फरमाता है कि इन लोगों के मुँह लगने के बजाय इन लगवियात से लोगों से एराज़ करते हुए अलग हो जाओ। सिर्फ उनकी मजलिस में बैठना या उनकी हाँ मिलाना ही गुनाह नहीं है, या गुनाहगार नहीं बनाता। बल्कि जब गलत काम करने वालों को इस तरह उल्टा कर जवाब दिया जाए और फिर वो उल्टा कर खुदा ताला का इस्तिदा करें या बुरा भला कहें या हज़रत सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम के बारे में नाज़ेबा अल्फाज इस्तेमाल करें या किसी भी रंग में इज़हार करें, तो तब भी हम में से जो लोग ऐसा करने वाले हैं इस गुनाह में शामिल हो रहे होंगे।
Jahangir Khan, if I can come to you in relation to the comments given by the Khalifa of Islam. He's quite clearly placing a heavy emphasis not only on Charlie Hebdo and the issues of free speech and also the Western governments, but also he's quite clearly talking about the perpetrators of the attack as well. So if I can ask a question which may be on the minds of some people who aren't Muslim in particular, the people who carried out this attack were running down the street and we saw videos of them shouting Allahu Akbar, and they would be very shocking for non-Muslim viewers to see. We also know that they said that we've avenged the honour of the Holy Prophet of Islam. May the peace and blessings of God be upon him. So in relation to those incidents, was this in any way an Islamic attack, and is there any support for this sort of behaviour in Islam?
Well, in fact, far from avenging the honour of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was clear that they besmirched his holy name even further. And the attack that they carried out was an attack on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because you see, blaspheming the holy name of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or God or religion is not something new in Islam. It was happening right at the beginning. Yeah. When the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam started giving his message, people reacted very, in very obnoxious ways, but also in very violent ways. And far from trying to seek retaliation in any, physical form, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's teachings were based on the Holy Quran, which, as we just heard, were وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِاللَّغْوِ مَرُّوا كِرَامًا. Whenever the believers pass by anything vain, they pass by with nobility, and they don't look back. And also Allah says that they're going to say very hurtful things to you, but be patient and keep giving your message to those who would like to hear it. So he responded in this way, and there are many stories of what happened to him, what people did to him, but one which really stands out is this lady in Mecca who was a non-Muslim and was an enemy of Islam, who every time she would see the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam passing by her house would throw rubbish on him. And he never responded to this in any way. But one day she didn't. He passed by her house and she didn't throw any rubbish on him. So he actually went and inquired, as to her health. Maybe she wasn't well, he asked, because today I passed by and she didn't throw any rubbish on me. So people went and found out and said, yes, she's not well. So he went in and actually went to visit her, and comfort her in her illness. So this was the reaction of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is what we, if we say we follow him, have to do. Right. We also have to show this forbearance and patience. Of course, we're very hurt by what these people have done, but it's not the way to go forward if we think that we're going to go and kill people, to force them in any way, to stop, abusing his name. On the contrary, we've seen that the backlash which is coming out, and which is a natural one, although it's misplaced, but it's to be expected. So
that's the true Islamic response is, in fact,
as it's written in Hosea, he who sows the wind will reap the whirlwind. And so if Muslims are going to do this, they have to expect some kind of backlash.
I see. So there's quite a clear response, I think, to those who might be concerned that is this in any way an Islamic action? And I think also for the Muslims that are watching at home, I think that they themselves need to really reflect upon the practice of Muhammad to work out all these sorts of incidents, the right response to these really vile attacks on people that they do hold very dear, but in fact we can see clearly the correct response is otherwise. Let's now, in connection with the points that Jahangir Khan Sahib has mentioned, let's go to Paris to get a bit of an insight into how the French people themselves are responding. Asif Arif, I know you're going to join us now by phone, so if I can bring you in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to Asif.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So Asif, you're of course the spokesperson for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in France, so thank you very much for joining us, brother. Let me open with the first question, which is, what is the current reaction in France to the Charlie Hebdo incidents?
Well, Jonathan, I think in order to understand the current situation in France, we need to look back a few years, because all this situation about Islam in France, because even if Muslim condemn strongly the attack, the same question arising into the media and into the politics is the question of Islam in France, or the question of radicalism in France. And we need to see back a few years ago what happened. Actually, in France, we have the 2005 law about the religious signs, who forbid any people to take the scarf in school. And then you have the 2010 law about the burqa, the veil law, and that's a very well-known law. And then we have a debate who was initiating by Nicolas Sarkozy about the national identity. Of course, he was replying to Muslim identity, because the politics knows that the fact of being Muslim is a part of our identity. So they were trying to tackle it, and this was the background before the Charlie Hebdo event. What came with Charlie Hebdo event is this debate on free speech or not free speech. Basically, the French people are really attached to the free speech, because since 1789, the French Revolution, they proclaimed this liberty, and they are really living this liberty in a dream way, we can say. So everyone knows that after this event there was a long and very huge march who was held in Paris, and during this march a lot of Muslims also joined this march in order to show their sign of of sympathy for the people who were die in this attack. But Muslims along the line strongly condemned the fact that Charlie Hebdo ever used cartoon. It was reflecting on the 2007 or 8 event, but they were also making, they were passing a message to Charlie Hebdo. We are coming here as Muslim, as French, and we are joining your families in this very sad period, because we are human.
Asif, but on that point that you just mentioned, you mentioned the march, and that was well covered in media in the UK and around the world because of the many leaders from around the world that came to Paris. Do you get a sense that as a result of this attack in France, that in fact more people are now supporting the kind of ideology or the kind of approach that Charlie Hebdo are presenting? Did you get a sense that the reaction within France is that? Because of course there's all of the element of Je suis Charlie, which we can see on the media. Do you feel that there's now more support for Charlie Hebdo within France?
Well, it's very complicated to say if they get more support or not, because it's a very emotional debate right now. What we will see, we will see the real effect of all this debate, I think, few months after. But we are actually seeing today that there is a problem which is raising into the French debate, which is the double standard problem. Because Jewish community has been also attacked in all these events, and the Home Affairs Ministry say that 4,000 policemen will do the surveillance to the synagogue. And actually, in the meantime, there were 50 mosques who have been attacked during the same period of time. But they didn't mention the fact that the mosque also needs protection. Sorry.
Yeah.
So actually, this double standard problem is arising into the French society.
Sorry to jump in. Very sorry about that. So I think there's a very clear element of France needing to reflect and work out what this means for them as a modern democracy. What about your role as a Muslim within France? But not only yourself, of course, you're talking on behalf of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. How have you as a community decided to respond to the recent atrocity?
Actually, we respond in three ways. The first way of response was to writing down article. I think Ahmadiyya Muslim community was the first community after the attack to condemn what happened in the Charlie Hebdo offices. So we wrote down an article. We stand by Charlie Hebdo, and we strongly condemn at the same time into this article all the cartoons done by the Charlie Hebdo. And during the event, for example, when there was some mosques who were attacked, we also wrote a paper about the fact that we are condemning the attack has been initiated on mosques and everywhere in France. But we also condemned the fact when Charlie Hebdo published the cover with this cartoon, we also condemned this. And our second action was to go on TV and to get some media and radio, and we were trying to tell them that media have a huge responsibility in all this, because the way of media use the word, for example, the word jihad or the word Islamism, and they foster Islamophobic thought in people. So we were trying to say that we should cover more peaceful event organized by every religion, interreligious event. For example, the Peace Symposium organized by the Ahmadiyya Muslim community every year. Or,
so
for example,
strong response from the whole community in response to the atrocities, a balanced response to condemn the attacks, but also really to call for a much more enlightened approach to freedom of speech. So thank you very much for giving us that input. So we now want to bring it back into the panel here, but in relation to this as well, Brother Farooq, I know that you've been looking around the world and you've been looking at how the Ahmadiyya Muslim community around the world has been responding as well, not just in France, but I think it's been a global response in many ways. What have you found from your research?
I think you'll get more details later on from Brother Khalil as well, I think, perhaps. But very quickly, the Prophet Messiah's fifth successor, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, gave details that extensive work was done, alhamdulillah, with Ahmadiyya Muslim communities, chapters in different parts of the world, of course, UK, France, Belgium, Greece, he mentioned, and of course, various TV channels, BBC, CNN, Sky, they've covered extensively the Ahmadiyya Muslim community's viewpoint, which is true message of Islam. We've got a couple of them lined up, perhaps, would be a good idea, but of course can't go into more than just a couple. Ahmadiyya Muslim community response to Paris, one of the stories in Canada, of course. Jamaat's response has been given at length on meridianbooster.com. Then the Vancouver Sun has given a story, rather a question from one of the reporters. His name is Douglas Todd, who asked a question: why are Ahmadiyya Muslims getting so much attention this week? The same point that Hazur also responded in his Friday sermon, and he answered back saying, in a very beautiful and eloquent way, Hazur said that it was decreed to happen anyway. The Prophet ﷺ was a true servant of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. His Jamaat had to take the lead and take the true message of Islam to the corners of the earth. And lastly, for the time being, is again WUSA has also given a story. I think it's in Chantilly, Virginia, and the story reads as Ahmadiyya Muslims say Islam means peace. I think perhaps let's ask Brother Khalil, from your perspective, from international level, what's been happening and how do you see the response this time compared to previous times?
Well, I mean, as you know, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, it's in more than 200 countries. Any time that there is attack on the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the entire community worldwide is mobilized. This happened at the time of the original cartoons. It happened in 2012 when there was the horrific, horrible movie about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and it's happened again now. You'll find that the International Press Desk, we have been engaging with the media. The UK media department, Amir Jamaat, Rafiq Ahmad Hayat Sahib, our Imam, Missionary Atal Mujib Rashid Sahib, the Canadians, the Americans, the Germans, you've heard from Asif Sahib in France. Everybody has engaged with the media to try and provide a balanced perspective about the how we feel about these murders, and also about the true character of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But there's something else that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community does, not just as part of our organisational structure, but each individual Ahmadiyya, of which there are approaching now 170 million, according to the latest figures that I have received. And that is that Ahmadiyya Muslims engage in prayer and durood. You see, this is the instruction of Allah in the Holy Quran. And we are invited to invoke blessings upon the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We're invited to invoke prayer of prosperity on the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and we are invited to reiterate the glory of Allah. And that is what all Ahmadiyya Muslims do, and it is something that all Muslims are encouraged to do, because that is part of our identity as Muslims, that is part of our DNA, to refer our disputes, to refer our grievances to Allah, to pray for the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and to find remedies in those ways. So the combination of the community worldwide engaging with the media, distributing pamphlets and books, having conferences and meeting with people to try and rebalance the perspectives about the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and show his true character, along with prayer and durood, are two of the things that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has been doing worldwide.
I think in relation to this as well, I know that Jahangir Khan, you're connected very closely with some of the press work, but also from a French angle, I think. And from some things that Mr. Yusuf's mentioned, obviously durood and prayers, but also a use of social media as well. How has the French-speaking countries taken upon themselves to respond to this incident?
Yes, that's actually quite interesting, because Twitter has changed a lot of things in the world, and the silent majority a few years back have now got a voice. And I think that one of the things that the Ahmadiyya community has benefited from is the fact that we can now reach out to all those people out there, and mostly through Twitter, Facebook, YouTube and all this, but mostly on Twitter. And first of all, I have to say that all the different French-speaking communities around the world issued statements in their local papers and also on Twitter. And I myself, being at the head of the international French desk, received immediately video and audio and even written messages of condemnation of what happened at Charlie Hebdo. And from at least 9 or 10 different French-speaking countries, immediately from the amirs, who are the presidents of our community there. But also, one of the things which was amazing this time, it's the response coming from the general public. There has been a lot of support of Muslims all around the world, and it's not as bleak as one might think. There's always, as we say, there's a silver lining to every cloud. But this one definitely had this silver lining, and it's very unfortunate that it has to be that people die for these things to happen. But the one thing which came out of all this is that Islam is now being spoken about. People are wanting to find out more. And also, people are feeling the double standards which are being used against Muslims, and they are speaking up in favor of Muslims in general. So I think this was a very opportune thing for both the Ahmadiyya community and also Muslims in general. Yes.
And you mentioned Twitter, and I know Farooq, you of course very paying close attention to Twitter and how the world is responding to these incidents. I think you've got a few interesting tweets that can inform the discussion a little bit as well.
Just a couple for a start. Gary Lineker, we all know his name, footballer from this country. Also, he's quoted Eric Cantona, who is a French footballer. And I think he played for Manchester United for a number of years towards the end of his career, and one of the top players actually. And Gary Lineker says that you can always rely on footballers to talk sense. Now let's see what sense Eric has spoken. Absolutely brilliant. He says, what happened doesn't have to be used against Islam. Fanaticism is everywhere, but it concerns just a minority of people. The rest are just simple Catholics, Buddhists, Muslims. I think that it's important to take the long and historical view. If we just focus on current affairs, if we limit our view to the news today, it is like things never happened before. It is important to recall that all this has already happened. It has happened before with terrorist groups which were not Muslims. He says it is dangerous to say that all Muslims are like that. It's important not to say that a Muslim is moderate. If he is just a citizen like you and me, what does moderate mean then? Does it mean that Islam is an extremist religion? This is a very dangerous provocation, and it's very dangerous indeed. And then I think one more tweet before, again we go back to the guests perhaps. is from a Jewish person by faith, but something he said is very inspirational. So, somebody named Lee Wiseman, who says the best way to defend the honor of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to act like him.
Very insightful tweets from viewers and from people at home. So I think we've managed by the grace of God and the assistance of the guests to cover part one quite well, which was really what's happened in the attacks, and also how do we respond to them, and how do we feel about them as such, or how does the world, how has it affected the global consciousness. But I think in part two we now want to go into a little bit more detail to work out the concept of freedom of speech and how does that relate to the Charlie Hebdo attacks. So as we go into this, then of course we need to get another sense again of some of the response of the media. So how has the media responded to this issue of free speech, Farooq?
Again, my worry is time. I think I'll just again quickly go through one or two. Rupert Murdoch sent a tweet. Now that would be interesting. And he's a tycoon in media, of course. We all know, owns the empire of media, if you like. He says, maybe most Muslims are peaceful, but until they recognize and destroy the growing jihadist cancer, they must be held responsible. So he's saying every Muslim is responsible. So the question then comes that, could it not be every human being then? Because these terrorists are between us, everyone, either Muslim or non-Muslim. But anyways, coming from him is slightly concerning for me personally. And then New York Times, the only top US newspaper not to publish Charlie Hebdo cover. That's what Huffington Post has said. And then, of course, Charlie Hebdo cartoons, press strives to balance freedom and responsibility, something said by Guardian newspaper. And a couple of lines, very, very helpful. It says, press freedom has never been taken to mean that we can publish anything we like. Legal constraints aside, editors have always taken account of society's wider sensibilities in deciding where to draw the line. Now let's now hear the second version of short bit of excerpts from Hazur's Friday sermon of last Friday on 16th January. Let's again hear and be enlightened.
آج کل دشمن اسلام کے خلاف تلوار اٹھانے کے بجائے ایسے ہی گھٹیا ہتھ کنڈے استعمال کر کے اسلام کی تعلیم کو اور آن حضرت صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کو نقصان پہنچانا چاہتے ہیں. اللہ تعالیٰ نے یہ کہہ کر کہ اللہ تعالیٰ اور اس کے فرشتے نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم پر رحمت بھیجتے ہیں، ایک اصولی بات بتا دی ہے کہ یہ حرکتیں نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کے مقام کو کچھ بھی نقصان نہیں پہنچا سکتی. تمہارا کام ان لغویات میں پڑھنے کے بجائے اسی طرح جہالت سے جواب دینے کے بجائے نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم پر درود اور سلام بھیجنا ہے. یہ ایک حقیقی مسلمان کا کام. اس کا حق ادا کرو تو تم نے سمجھو کہ تم نے اپنا فرض ادا کر دیا. جیسا کہ میں نے ذکر کیا کہ وہ لوگ جو اس بےہودہ رسالے کے خلاف تھے، اس حملے کے بعد ان میں سے بہت سے اس کے حق میں بھی ہو گئے کہ آزادی رائے کا ہر ایک حق ہے. لیکن اس کے باوجود ایسے انصاف پسند اور عقل مند بھی ہیں ان لوگوں میں جنہوں نے اس رسالے کی حضرت صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کے متعلق اس رسالے کے حضرت صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کے متعلق بےہودہ اظہار کو ناپسند کیا اور ناپسند کرتے ہوئے اس کی انتظامیہ کو ذمہ دار ٹھہرایا. مثلاً اس رسالے اس کا نام چارلی ہیبدو ہے، اس کے ابتدائی ممبر جن کا نام ہینری رسل ہے، وہ کہتے ہیں کہ جو خاکے اس اخبار نے بنائے تھے وہ بھڑکانے والے تھے، اور یہی وجہ ہے کہ اس غیر ذمہ دارانہ فعل کی وجہ سے ایڈیٹر نے اپنی ٹیم کو موت کے منہ دھکیل دیا. اور کہتے ہیں کہ اس قسم کی باتیں ہماری بنیادی پالیسی کے خلاف تھیں جو یہ گزشتہ کئی سالوں سے کر رہے ہیں. اسی طرح پوپ نے بڑا اچھا بیان دیا کہ آزادی رائے کی کوئی حد ہونی چاہیے. آزادی رائے کی یہ مطلب نہیں ہے کہ بالکل چھوٹ دے دی جائے. انہوں نے کہا کہ ہر مذہب کا ایک وقار ہے और इसका एहतराम ज़रूरी है और किसी भी मज़हब की इज़्ज़त पर हमला नहीं करना चाहिए।
So the Khalifa of Islam has quite clearly felt that, or has decided to guide his community and also the world, that there's a very important element here about free speech and how we respond to these cartoons and these images. Going to yourself, Mr. Yusuf, I know of course you have a legal background and you've responded to some of the legal issues, but how do you think freedom of speech in light of the Charlie Hebdo attacks is best understood from a legal angle, and should there be any limits to freedom of speech, or should anybody be able to say whatever they want, whenever they want, no matter how they offend?
Well, the argument over the course of the last week and a half, and this often happens when you have instances like this, has been characterised as being one of freedom of expression, the right to live in a free society, the right to protect our democratic values, as if somehow freedom of speech in its very essence is under attack, and that is going to lead to the fall of our society. Well, that is, in my very respectful view, somewhat of a red herring, because freedom of speech, freedom of expression does exist, but it only exists within the limit of the law. We already have significant restrictions on freedom of speech. You cannot be racist, you cannot be homophobic, you cannot be sexist, you cannot, you have regulation on television in the form of Ofcom, you have licensing of films and games to ensure that children aren't exposed to content which is inappropriate. You have other limitations, defamation, libel. Lots and lots of restrictions exist both in Britain and elsewhere. You have, in Germany, you have laws that prevent Holocaust denial. So the world is filled with laws that prevent speech from going beyond limits that society has decided we should not transgress. And the reason why we do that is so that we live in a peaceful society. Just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean that it is right to do it. And the Pope made this point, as has been mentioned by Farooq Saab, that if you have the right to abuse somebody's mother, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it. So then there is a question about why we should be entitled to abuse what is absolutely the most sacred thing for 1.6 billion Muslims, but then not have the right to say other things that are against the law, like, for instance, to be racist. So that question is really important for society to consider about whether really it is the right thing to do to offend the very deep sensibilities of a very significant portion of the people of this world.
So you may have a legal right to do something, but whether you want to morally exercise that right is a different thing. What about from an Islamic perspective? Does it reflect what Mr. Yusuf has told us here about?
Absolutely. You see, Islam does not call for any legal sanction for whatever people want to say. They can express it, but they also have to be responsible and they have to think about the sensibilities of people. The founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam, he actually wrote in his final book, the Paygam-e-Sulh, which is the message of peace and reconciliation, that we have the right, according to the Holy Quran, to eat beef. But if in India, by not eating beef, we can help our Hindu brothers and sisters to not feel offended by what we're doing, then we should do that. He said, having the right to do something does not mean you have to do it. So there has to be a responsibility there. On the contrary, he called for people, because as we just heard in the extract of Hazur's sermon, he said that instead of going out and committing these atrocities and to find vengeance for the Prophet, instead we should go out and speak about his beauties and speak about his teachings. And this is what we should do. Islam is being attacked by the pen, so we should respond in kind. And that's exactly what we're doing these days, especially in the social media. We're responding by giving out the beautiful teachings of Islam, and people are warming to these and they are responding very positively. So this is a positive outcome of this unfortunate and deplorable event, actually.
Mm-hmm. Well, or Brother Farooq has done an interview previously with a journalist, and many of these issues were brought up about how should the media be behaving in these sorts of contexts, and are there duties on the media, but also individually, how should we be exercising our rights to freedom of speech, and should we say things which we know will offend other people gravely just because we have the legal ability to do so, which I think cuts to the heart of the Charlie Hebdo incident. So let's go to this video now and let's have an insight into what this journalist gave us as guidance.
Firstly, where do you think the media should in fact draw the line when it comes to offending religious sensitivities?
Well, of course, the atmosphere is very emotive at the moment, but the essential thing is that editors have to take their own decisions on the basis of their readers, their assessment of the news, and so some editors in France, of course, and elsewhere in Europe, have deliberately reprinted the cartoons, and there was this massive show of public support, which they would have to take account of. There is also the law, though, so when newspapers or media overstep the line, then they may be found guilty of inciting racism or so on. That is something that is present in the law, and where the media are subject to it. I think the majority view is that the threat of violence against the whole state and against the whole population of France has changed the situation, and so there's enormous public support for the arguments of Charlie Hebdo. You have to remember that Charlie Hebdo and similar cartoons have been taken to court in the past in France itself and found to be within the law, although clearly we're dealing with a situation where the majority Muslim population, France has the largest in Europe, and there's similar views in Muslim populations elsewhere in Europe, do feel strongly because of what they learn from their own religion, that these symbols are sacred and therefore should not be published. But the idea of a reformed Islam, one which takes account of the international law and the sensibilities of the majority population, I think is now going to come to the fore.
Lord Leveson in the Leveson Inquiry has in fact commented slightly on this. He said that when a free press in a democracy provides information, that information should be both intelligible and accurate. So in your view, in regards to this statement, in what way does the exercise of free speech by the press have to be in fact reasonably intelligent and accurate? And do you feel that the recent cartoons were so?
Well, obviously there's a lot of individual sensibility and a lot of emotion about the Charlie Hebdo thing, not least because now the kind of senseless and horrific violence which we've seen in other religious conflicts around the world, in Nigeria, and the intolerance we see in Saudi Arabia against those who criticize Iran, is now very, very palpably here among us. I think we have, in the end, as a society, we've seen an enormous display of public reaffirmation of the liberal spirit of European societies. But at the same time, for example, the Quilliam Foundation in the UK, I think, has struck the right kind of balance. They, as you know, they're a reformist Muslim movement, and they say that Islamism must be confronted as any totalitarian ideology, but at the same time there's no security solution, no total security solution to this problem. It has to be about communities, a mutual toleration, and the state ensuring that minorities are looked after.
William Horsley, thank you very much. Thank you.
So that was an interview with William Horsley, and William Horsley was a 15-year-long foreign correspondent with the BBC. So we've looked at this now in terms of the right to freedom of speech, and as many of the viewers at home will know, that one of the leading countries in the world to consider freedom of speech and with one of the strongest rights to freedom of speech is America. So let's go to America now. We have the spokesperson for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in America ready to talk online. So Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah to Horace Zafar Saab.
Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullah. How are you?
Very well, brother. So Horace, we want to get a bit of an insight into the US, and we want to understand what have some of the reactions of the US been, particularly sort of reactions from US media leaders and public, for example? What would you say in terms of reactions?
Well, the reaction in public discourse does differ quite a bit from the political and the press discourse. In the political and the media realm, the United States continues to be quite polarized in the way that they discuss certain matters, especially matters referring to Islam. So we did see the far right, the very conservative media, that did take this as another opportunity to bring in terms like radical Islam, Islamist, Muslim terrorist. There's some shows that didn't even call this a terrorist attack; they call it an Islamic attack. Whereas you have others, like was mentioned earlier, I think by Jahangir Saab, that we have seen other journalists that are pushing back and not labeling Islam as a result, and pushing back on those that say that Muslims need to apologize for these type of actions. So it's been polarized as usual, but I think the common American is taking somewhat of a middle approach of just trying to figure out how this happened and what do we do about it.
What about the Ahmadiyya Muslim community within America? What sort of activities have you been engaged in to shed some light on the situation, to inform the US debate?
As soon as this happened, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community here in the United States immediately mobilized. There's been this intense letter and article writing campaign. Even the Muslim Writers Guild, which is a component of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Youth Association here in the United States, within the first few days, within the first week of this event, had already published 50 letters to the editor and op-eds and columns in different various newspapers. We've appeared on Fox News, we've appeared on CNN, we've had many articles published around the country, all in this rigorous defense of Islam and this wide condemnation of this violence, and trying to balance the equation and explain how do we understand Islam in the light of these attacks, and bringing forth Hazur's comments, the Khalifa of Islam, to really show that there is this vibrant voice within the Muslim community that should be heard.
Thank you very much, Horace, for joining us today and giving us that insight into America, and hopefully we'll have you on again in future shows. Thank you.
I look forward to it. Jazak.
Assalamu alaikum. Mr. Yusuf, if I could come to yourself. If I were or if one was to put on the hat of somebody who isn't Muslim, for example, and they were to say, well, why can't Charlie Hebdo say things like this, and why shouldn't a person be able to really seriously offend another person in their speech? What's wrong with offending people, they might say. So how would you respond to that? And they might also say that this is my freedom of speech, and if I offend Tom, Dick and Harry, as is proverbially said, then what's wrong with that? What's wrong with offending people?
Well, I mean, that has been the direction of the argument that we've been having over the course of the last week or week and a half. The reality is that the purpose for freedom of expression in the 1700s, it was mentioned, the Declaration of Man, Asif mentioned it for France, but around the late 1700s, Europe and the US all acquired this freedom of speech, freedom of expression right within their constitutions, within their systems of governance. And the purpose of it was not so that you have the right to offend. The purpose of it was so that the truth would come out. Everybody should have the entitlement to be able to say what they want so that you could all then arrive at the truth. That is a central theme to freedom of expression. It is, does it help you to arrive at the truth or not? That is precisely why you have restrictions on being racist or homophobic or elsewhere, because that doesn't help you arrive at the truth. What it does is it causes division and harm within society. So the key word is not offence, the key word is harm and truth. So the extent to which freedom of expression leads us to truth, that is a good thing. The extent to which freedom of expression leads us to harm, that is a bad thing. So those, I would say, are broadly the distinctions.
Okay, so some really useful guiding principles that we can use to work from. For yourself, Jahangir Khan, do you think that we've heard about truth and we've heard about sort of freedom of speech being a method of achieving that? What about within Islam, for example? Because a lot of people would say that the Charlie Hebdo cartoons are a really good example of why we need blasphemy laws. And in fact, that this is blasphemy, and Islam just doesn't tolerate blasphemy, and as a result, freedom of speech at the point that it goes into blasphemy, it's absolutely wrong, and therefore we can also go and carry out acts such as happened in Paris. Is that a valid Islamic argument, do you think?
No, it's not a valid Islamic argument at all. If anything, Islam tells Muslims not to blaspheme others, and tells them not even to deride their false gods, their imaginary gods, because then they, out of spite and ignorance, they'll deride God, who's the true God. But as far as other people are concerned, they have every right to say what they want in any way they want. But Islam does tell people that they should speak in a sensible way. They should have a correct manner to conduct their dialogue in. And the Muslims themselves are told, Jadilhum billati hiya ahsan. Always argue with people with what is best. So always use courteous ways to argue with people. Don't offend their sensibilities, because as Khalil just said, it's all about peace in society. At the end of the day, we need to ask the question, why are we allowing these things to happen? If something is not conducive to peace and is actually detrimental to peace, then it is for society to reflect upon this and decide whether they'd like those things to continue or not.
So what do you think Charlie Hebdo's actions, the reason isn't, of course, peace. The reason apparently is to raise the number of subscriptions being bought out there in the market. Is that the reason, do you think, probably? What is the common sense behind their approach?
Well, you see, they obviously have a readership there who like this kind of... they're obscenities, we have to say it. They are obscenities, and they have an obsession with certain types of obscenities as well. These have nothing to do with the truth, like you were just saying here. And it does not do anything to contribute to the argument in any way at all. If anything, it just, it exposes things in ways which are untrue, in fact.
Or contribute to the health of society either. I mean, ultimately, there's been a discussion in France about freedom of expression. On the one hand, they say there absolutely has to be freedom of expression within France. We defend that right to the very end. And on the other hand, there are other restrictions on freedom of expression. Asif mentioned the ban on burqas, the ban on Jews wearing the Jewish yarmulke, on big Russian crosses, on the Sikh turban. You can't, on the one hand, in my very respectful view, say you have absolute freedom of expression on the one hand to purport or put forward your secular views, but then that is at the expense of religious views, because what that leads to then ultimately is what you call intolerant liberalism, and intolerant liberalism doesn't really help anybody.
And what about those world leaders, for example? Initially they were against this Charlie Hebdo a few years back. They were against these caricatures being published. Of course, they were losing their readership. Why have they all of a sudden turned?
They've joined the bandwagon, haven't they? Everyone's getting something out of it. There are general elections coming up in different countries this year. And so there were obviously political gains to be had out of all this. So it has nothing to do with freedom of speech at all. This was a crime against humanity which was committed. Like I've said before, if somebody has a neighbor who plants different flowers in their garden and they don't like them, and they tell them, please remove them, and then he doesn't, if they go and kill that person then, will they say that it was the freedom of gardening which was threatened? Or, which was attacked? Not at all. It has nothing to do with that. It's a crime. There are mad people out there, and they are going to commit these crimes. We can't control the mad people within the Muslims, no more than Christians can control the mad people within their ranks. So we have to see the things for what they are and deal with them responsibly, and not, create this big brouhaha over something which is not really the reality,
How do we then, if we looking at this from the population of the Muslims, then they say that we love the Holy Prophet very, very dearly, and that this is an expression of our loyalty to him. We do this because we love him. How best to respond to that, Mr. Yusuf?
That wasn't the example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. If Muslims want to respond, then the way that they should respond is through following the Islamic teachings. And where do you find those? You find them in the Holy Quran, you find them in the Hadith, you find them in the Sunnah. And in all of those, what you don't find is any authority for individuals going out and committing murder in the name of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. There is no authority for that whatsoever. And in fact, the consequence of that has been absolutely the opposite, because what they have done is they've taken a failing newspaper with a circulation of 60,000. They have now had a recent circulation of 5 million, probably extended its life now for 10 years. It was ready to go bankrupt. They have now triggered further publishing of the cartoons, the consolidation of people against Islam. So 3 individuals have now held Islam to ransom. That cannot be, under any circumstances, under any stretch of the imagination, for the benefit of Islam.
These lunatics and the newspapers on the same side, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. But the thing is, one thing which a message we should give to Muslims out there is, please don't call on people to go out and demonstrate, because the result of these demonstrations is always more mayhem, more destruction and vandalism, and even lives are lost. Even in the Muslim countries where these demonstrations are being held, lives are lost every week. So this is not the way to go forward. We have to respond by showing the true teachings of Islam and the beauties of Islam, and also by helping people in general, being good to humanity. Because then people who know that we're being kind to them and we're helping them, they will come out in favor of Muslims as human beings, and let's say, no, these people are not who you think they are. We know better.
Yes. So a call for balance, and a call for values of truth, and calls for values of peace, and for values of justice as well overall. So I think very, very useful insights and very important insights from the guests, and also from our guests that have joined us via Skype. That's all that we have time for today. I think that to really draw some of the key themes together, on the one hand, of course, everybody around the world is condemning the Charlie Hebdo attacks and the atrocities which have been meted out against the people within France. But on the other hand, our guests have very clearly said that this was not, on the one hand, an Islamic attack, and certainly the response isn't to attack holy personages of Islam or of any other religion. And in fact, true freedom also includes an element of morality, which is to do what is best, not simply to do whatever one feels like at any given time. And that's a much deeper concept of freedom of speech. So thank you to our viewers at home as well for tweeting and joining us in the show today. Please do join myself and Farooq and all of the Press Point team next month, when we'll be discussing again Islam and the response to some of the current affairs issues which are at the heart of a global dialogue at the moment. Thank you very much, and may the peace and blessings of Almighty God be upon you.
Has launched the campaign to try and counter the extremists.
Now speaking out to denounce terror and extremism.
30,000 people formed a human chain in the south this afternoon in the name of peace.
We're asking if religious intolerance is on the rise.
We believe that religious freedom is a fundamental human right.
Giving a message that Islam is a religion of peace.
We must all endeavor to spread love and a sense of community.